if I unfortunately died tomorrow, I don't want a half done book on my desktop. If I were to die tomorrow and someone were to find this book on my desktop, they could publish it tomorrow. Well, that was kind of like a driving point where like I want this book to be completed. I want it to be done right.
Welcome back to the Vibe with Kai podcast, sponsored by Sucreabeille. My friends, you know that I am obsessed with finding things that just fit my brain. And Sucreabeille is exactly that. They are a woman-owned indie perfume house that creates stories in a bottle. They are geeky and they are storytelling geniuses, and they celebrate being exactly who you are. And I have to tell you, if you haven't checked out my collaboration scent with Sucreabeille, you're really missing out. It's called Why Did I Walk Into This Room? That is the real name, and it is a love letter to my entire ADHD family out there. And get this, it literally smells like a warm hug. It has notes of cherry pie, cinnamon, and it smells like pure acceptance. It's my daily go-to smell. So buy yours today at sucreabeille.com. Now, on to today's conversation. Today's conversation is for anyone who has a doom pile of unfinished projects just sitting in the corner of the room or in a folder on their desktop. We all know the ADHD struggle of staring at a million things and finishing zero of them. But my guest today, Steele, spent five years, I think it was 5 years, hyper-focusing on a single massive project. It's his debut novel, and it's called What the City Said. In this episode, we talk all about how to actually cross that finish line, how trauma forces us to adapt, and we get into some really deep conversations about mental health, masculinity, and the erasure of innocence. It gets real, and it gets gritty. And listen, you are definitely going to want to check out the Reverse the Mic segment from this episode, which is available exclusively for my subscribers on Patreon and Facebook. In this Reverse the Mic segment, Steele, he turns the tables on me and he asks me some really tough questions about my own writing and what it's like being a Black content creator in this space. You can get that segment along with my full ADHD deep dive video library by subscribing for only $5 a month on Facebook and or Patreon. But for now, my friends, let's get into it. Here is my conversation with the author, Steele. I want to welcome my guest, Steele. I love that. I love that. So powerful. Steele, hanging out with Steele today. Before we dive into this massive world that you've created, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to our mutual friend, Monisha Holmes, whom I love and adore with all my heart. How did you two cross paths? And like, did she warn you about how nerdy and dorky I am in real life?
I'm surprised she didn't warn you how nerdy and dorky I am, honestly. I think that was where that common connection came from. But no, I've known Monisha for a very long time, and she was actually one of the collaborators who helped me. She looked over my book and helped me with a lot of perspectives on my book as well. And I've known her for over a decade now. We went to the same college together, and we've stayed in contact. And I've followed her on social media, and I've always supported her content, and now she's supporting mine.
Yes. Shout out to Manisha, our friend. I love you so much. So I'm gonna call her after this and be like, I got to talk to Steele today.
No, I'm definitely sending her a text after. I appreciate her a lot. She's a great person, a great friend.
She's fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. So you had mentioned your book, right? Which is one of the reasons why we're talking today. And the book is called What the City Said. So for the people that are hearing the name of this book for the first time, let's introduce them to it. What is this book about?
So the book, it's about a fictional city that I created that kind of, it breaks down, shows pretty much a different side of America. It takes all of like America's problems and kind of like puts it all into one city, so to speak. Like there's corruption in the city, there's gang violence, there's different classes that are broken apart in the different boroughs of the city. And so there's different class relations within it. And the story follows a lot of different storylines. Even though it's called What the City Said, it's more about the people who live in the city. And I got the inspiration from it because I used to live in a big city myself. I used to live in Boston, Massachusetts. And there's just so many different people from races, backgrounds, religious backgrounds. And It follows a lot of different storylines. It follows these three teenagers who are trying to figure out what they're going to do after high school. They're graffiti artists, and they're just trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. It follows the one main character who's going to be sent off to military school, and he's trying to just kind of cope with that and kind of figure out what he wants to do with his life. The other storylines follow a detective who has pretty much a secret about him, who kind of fights, entangles with his own masculinity. He's battling that, battling his own internal demons, as well as solving like a multiple homicide. And then we have a couple of other like minor storylines as well, like other people in the city who affect like the overall story. One of them is a homeless vet that he has severe PTSD, and he helps drive the narrative of the story along. And I through this whole fictional world, I've also created like a history to this fictional city where back in the 1920s it was started by the mob, and particularly it talks about one of the men in the mob who is trying to provide for his family during the Great Depression, and how his ties with gang violence and mob violence helped shape the city to what it is now. And his and the mob's influence on the politics within the city helped drive it to why the city itself is divided into different classes, and why there's a lot of segregation within the city as well. So it kind of follows a lot of different storylines,
Hmm.
but they all tie together into like an overall arch, and all the storylines kind of come together. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like a quick summary of it.
Yeah, I love it, and we're gonna dive deep into some of those things in the book because there's a lot of questions that I have about that. But from a writing standpoint, right? You had mentioned that you started writing this during the peak of COVID, right? During the
Mhm,
peak of the lockdown, and you said this was your magnum opus, right?
mhm.
So obviously, a lot of us, a lot of my audience, we struggle with ADHD, and sticking with one project for 5 years sounds like climbing Mount Everest with like no oxygen, right? How the hell did you manage to keep your brain focused on this one story for that long without chasing so many other shiny ideas I'm sure you had during that time period?
Well, like you said, 5, I've been working on it since 2020. 5 years is a long time, and I'm a novice writer myself. I'm no Stephen King, and I definitely have ADHD where I get distracted,
Mhm,
and, I different projects, kind of take up my time. But one way that really helped me to break it down is I broke down each chapter into their own story, so to speak. Having different characters really helped me not get distracted as much, instead of
mhm,
making it about like one character, one problem throughout the entire book, where that's kind of harder to write about. I made each chapter about a particular character, its problems, how it ties back into the overarching story, and that kind of helps me stay focused. Don't get me wrong, I had my severe takes of writer block.
I'm
That's
sure.
why it took, 5 years to write, but I wanted to make sure it was perfect. Like you said, it was definitely my magnum opus. I've always wanted to publish a novel, and the first one that I published, I wanted to be the best that it could be. Um, but one thing that really helped me stay focused was kind of breaking it down into the different chapters. There's 26 chapters, so it's essentially like 26 different stories. And it- One thing that also helped me stay focused was doing the research
Mhm,
itself, because like I mentioned, the different characters of the stories are from different races, different religions, and I wanted to make sure I was representing each race, each religion, each political ideology
yeah,
as accurate as I could. So talking to different people really helped me stay on track. Like I said, Monisha was a great help, and she gave me the woman's perspective and the African American perspective on how I should
mhm.
really like focus on different characters and how a character would say something, as opposed to how I would think they would say it. And that kind of helped me break it down and stay focused on the overall story.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I love the the origin of the book's first line, right? So your brother said, if a book told me not to read it, I'd be instantly hooked.
Mhm.
And you ran with that,
I
right?
did.
Why is that? Why do you think that reverse psychology like works well with our brain? What is the story behind that?
Well, I was writing a book before when I did live in Boston. A little background about me. I 2020, I moved back from Boston to living with my parents, and I was writing a book before, and it was terrible. I showed it to some people, and even me rereading it now, it was awful. And I kind of gave up on writing at that point, and I was back with my parents, and I was just with my brother who moved back home too. Everyone moved back in with their parents, and we were just talking about writing, and he was like, "If a book told me not to read it, I would be instantly hooked and I would read it." And I created that first line where it's like, if you read this book, this character is going to kick your ass. And
Yeah.
that kind of like evolved the story from there. I just kind of ran with it, and that just kind of like continued to get inspiration, and that grew and grew and grew. It kind of reminded me of, there was this author I used to read when I was in high school. She wrote this novel. It was a zombie apocalypse novel, which was very popular back when I was in high school. All those
Sure.
zombie books, apocalypse books, romance novels. And
Mhm.
she said, she came to our high school and she talked about her book. And she said, I thought of one line. My mother always used to tell me about the ocean. And she said that inspired just a domino effect of an entire
Mhm.
story. And that's kind of what it did to me. Granted, my first line isn't as profound as hers, but
It works.
it worked. It got
It
the
works.
dominoes falling and the
Yeah.
everything rolling, and it kind of became something outside myself where I wanted it to be a fun and kind of silly book to read, but I also wanted it to talk about issues that are going on today, and the issues that are going on in America, and issues that are going on with young people and mental health. And it kind of just spiraled into something that was bigger and bigger, and that's
Mhm.
again why it took me so long to write.
Sure, sure. I wanna talk about Trinity City here, right? Because you've built this fictional metropolis that it feels frighteningly real. Like you talked about this in the beginning about like the some of the ideas behind it and the ideology, I should say, corruption, segregation, politics, right? Now, for all of this, for all of that, one of the questions that I was going to ask, I'm like, I can't ask this because I think the answer is clear. But one of the questions I was going to ask is Trinity City a place that people would want to visit, or is it a place that people run from? And the reason I didn't want to ask it is because again, like you were saying, it's based off of so much that we live through and deal with now, right? But can you talk about, instead of me asking that question, can you talk about what is the difference between the world that we're in now and Trinity City? Like what is the difference there? How does this book serve as a, I guess, escape for people that are looking for an escape from this world that we're in right now?
Well, it's definitely I would say it's an amalgamation of America just kind of brought down into like a smaller
Mhm,
platform, I would say, like a smaller world. Like, America is very divided. There's different classes and everything. And I divided the city up in the same way. Like how you said, would someone want to visit it? There's certain parts of the city where like the elite and the rich people live. Like there's a area called Jupiter Isles, and then there's Central Trinity that are,
mhm,
more of the aristocrats and the rich people who live. And, that's where the tourists go, and City Hall's
mhm,
there. And then you start going more south within the city, and that's where you see the segregation and the gang violence. And um, there's like two different rival gangs living within the city, and the main teenage characters who I write about live in the projects of this city, like in it's called Seneca Village, kind of as a
mhm,
nod to the neighborhood that was demolished in New York and
mhm,
was paved over by Central Park.
mhm,
And I kind of did little nods like that throughout my book. And a way to kind of make it an escape, like even though it's very centered around uh like racism and political divide and different things like that. I added my own little twists of humor to it as well, even though some of the stuff,
Uh-huh.
it's very serious topics and you can't always joke about it, but I've added my own little twists of humor to it. I've also
Mhm.
added a little bit of fiction to it. There's a little bit of science fiction within the book that kind of takes you away from it. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's an
Yeah,
overall mystery going on where the detective character is trying to solve a multi homicide of five men who died,
yeah.
and they all mysteriously died of old age. And even though they were identified to be in their 30s and 40s,
Mhm.
they all died of old age. So it's that overall mystery, and there is a little bit of science fiction to it. I tried to mash a lot of different genres into this book because
Mhm.
from my experiences in life, life isn't just one genre.
Mhm.
We don't live in a chronic state of humor. We don't live in a chronic state of romance, and
Mhm.
I tried to mash so many different genres into this. Like the kid story, if you just focus on that, that's like a coming of age story. And
Sure.
then the detective story is like a murder mystery story. And then it's one thing that I feel like kind of separates it is just all the genres kind of mesh together in this fictional
Yeah.
city that kind of help with that
Yeah.
escape.
I love that because I love the quote that you just said, "Life isn't just one genre." As a writer, right? That must have been hard, right? Like, because
Mhm.
usually, like, when you think of books and movies even and TV shows, any kind of creative art like that, usually it'll stick to one genre, right? But, like, here, like you mentioned, there's so much going on. You have, like, this gritty, realistic crime drama. You have a coming of age story. There's some supernatural twists. How how do you as a writer navigate this without it feeling disjointed?
Well, I think a part of it, like we mentioned, is my ADD and everything. I
Yeah.
feel like that kind of helped with the pacing of the story.
Mm,
Like I said, just writing about one character and one plot line, that can get very rudimentary over time, and that can get very, boring to someone like me. And I think dividing each chapter up and, I'm like, this chapter is going to be more dramatic than this chapter, and this chapter is going to be more humorous and more fun. This one's going to be, more focusing on the kids and, their teenage antics. Like a lot of what the kids do is, skipping school and, doing graffiti and, stuff I used to do as a kid. So I tried
yeah.
to relate it to stuff I used to do and other people's stories. And I think just having those different genres in there and kind of making them each chapter its own genre, its own story, with its own characters that all tie together kind of helped me stay on track and helped me write a better novel.
Yeah, it's amazing. No, I wanna dig into, one of the characters here, Detective Julian Yang,
Hmm.
right? You had mentioned that he battles, with masculinity, and he carries a lot of this internal shame, right? He's hiding behind this tough guy persona. Without giving away his arc in the story, is it fair to say that this character is a I guess a metaphor in a way for emotional masking that so many of us do every single day.
I definitely believe so.
Mhm,
To give away a little bit, just
mhm,
because it is a little bit of an early reveal in the book.
mhm,
The detective is a homosexual. He's really, really closeted,
mhm,
and he wants to be this manly detective. He used to work for the FBI, and you find out later in the book that he was working for the FBI in the 90s, and because of his homosexuality, he was outed, and
mhm,
they fired him. They essentially start putting him on dead end cases and putting made him do paperwork and all that, and it made him start his own detective agency, and he still struggles with who he is as a person. He wants to come off as a rugged, strong detective, and he thinks of himself as less of a man because of who he loves and his homosexuality. And, that's something that he battles with throughout the entire, essence of his story in the book. He's called slurs throughout the book. He's, just made less of a man by people that know that he's gay. And he does everything he can to be like, no, I'm this masculine detective, and he
Mhm.
puts all of his work into his job to solve this case to prove something to himself. And that's kind of like, I feel like a lot of men nowadays, homosexual or not, they have an internal battle with their masculinity. And, there's a lot of different definitions of what masculinity is nowadays and what
Mhm.
defines it. And I think that's one of like the big things that's really touched on within this book. And it really
Mhm.
separates the difference between what a man is, what a toxic man is, because there are other males in this book who are very, very toxic masculinity. And that's something that I touch on within his story.
Sure. The other character that I want to talk about here is Roger Devens, right? Who
Hmm.
is a homeless war veteran living with severe PTSD, schizophrenia. And there's a chapter in the book called "A Life Once Lived,"
Hmm.
and it's pretty heavy, and because it dives into the I guess flashbacks and his trauma. And I'm curious again as a writer, because I write a lot, right? But like I can't imagine how difficult it is to write about this stuff, and not only write about it, but write about it in a way, especially when it comes to mental health, in a way that's respectful and accurate. So how did you go about doing that? How did you go about ensuring that your portrayal of that level of mental health struggle was, respectful and accurate?
Of course, and honestly, that's one of my favorite chapters
Mhm.
in the entire book. It was one of my favorite to write because I did a lot of research when it came
Mhm.
to that because I'm not a war vet. I haven't struggled with PTSD or different things like that. So I had to really deep dive and do research and see what United States veterans go through who have been to war. And the story of his life kind of devolves of him coming back from his time served in Afghanistan, um, and how he tries to assimilate back into his real life, and he copes with. I try and make it very clear, like who he is and who the voices in his head are through just like my verbiage and my texts and
Mhm.
everything, and um, it's unfortunately it shows how he turns to alcoholism, which is a big issue among vets
Mhm.
in America today. After war, they dive into drugs, they become homeless, they start drinking, and that's a really really big like cog in America's culture. It's like our vets go out and they fight these wars and they die and then they come back and then they're treated like nothing. And
Mhm.
I want to really touch about his family life and who he is as a person and his struggles and what he's had to battle with in through going to war and
Yeah.
what he's experienced.
Right. One of the things I very much appreciate is your view on heroes having flaws, right? And on top of that, your heroes having flaws and your bad guys having these very humanizing moments, right? Like for example, you have an antagonist who essentially believes that he is saving the city through his actions, right? And it's such an interesting perspective to go about it that way. And I'm curious, do you feel that it's dangerous, or it adds a level of danger, especially from a storytelling standpoint, when a villain genuinely believes that they are the hero of the story? I feel like that adds a sense of really unique danger there. What do you think?
I definitely think, like, I want to make it as real as possible because,
Mhm,
there's when you look at everyday life, there are villains out there and there are heroes out there, and I think every good guy in real life has their bad side, and every bad guy has their good side, Like, even, like, every single, like, person who's doing bad things, they think in their head they're doing the right thing,
mhm,
And I've made a lot of characters that, you read what they're saying and you're like, "This is a fucking bad guy." But,
mhm. Oh,
you
yeah.
know, I put them in situations where, you know, where it kinda makes you think where it's like, if I was in that situation, would I do the same thing? Kinda like that, and, I start off one of the main protagonist, I wrote him as just like this just bad, like, bad person with no redeemable qualities,
Mhm.
and I feel like that's not really true to, like, how real life is, even, like, as much as I hate to say it, there are redeemable qualities in bad people. I think bad people can change, and I think,
Sure, sure. Mhm.
and even the protagonists in my story, they have their bad qualities. The one of the main teenagers in the book, he's kind of an asshole.
Dell,
Yeah,
right?
Dell.
Dell, like, and who's very immature
Mhm.
quote, "kind of a dick,"
Yeah.
right, from the start, and I think a lot of us, though, can relate to Dell, because
Mhm.
I think we can relate to being an angry, confused teenager who doesn't know maybe how to process their emotions in a healthy way,
Mhm.
right? And so I love that you're talking about writing about a protagonist in this case where the audience might not like them at first, right? But they will eventually start to understand.
Mhm.
Like it must be difficult to write that knowing that the audience has or you're putting trust that the audience will stick with you long enough to see his growth.
Mhm.
Was like as you were writing that character, did you know what kind of growth Dell was going to have from the beginning, or did it kind of happen as you were writing?
It kinda happened as I was writing,
Hmm.
because like I said, this book took 5 years to write,
Yeah.
and I'm a very different person who I was 5 years ago, and I tried to write the character of Dell as, like, a personification of myself and my brother as we were as teenagers.
Hmm.
More so of my as my brother because that's who he's kind of, um, kinda like. He's my
Hmm.
brother's name is Drake, and that's, you know,
Hmm.
kind of the
Hmm.
Dell's name,
Sure.
and he, throughout it I would reread kind of his lines and his actions, and it made me think, you know, I have to redeem this character somehow, and throughout the story, I wanted him to go through very, like, drastic life-changing events that made his points of view change and made his ideologies change, and you know he's living in a poor part of the city. He's kind of got dealt a shitty hand,
Right.
and you're not going to be overly optimistic when life does that to you, and you're
Well,
gonna yeah.
yeah, I feel like that's a recurring theme in
Hmm.
the book, right? Like, it's about how bad situations kind of force us to adapt, right? Do you believe that personally? Do you believe that trauma is necessary for growth, or is it just something that we just tell ourselves to survive every day, or
I
both?
I definitely think so because I mean there's a line in the book where it says, and this is a quote that I actually saw online and I incorporated into my book where it's like, if you had to go 2 miles, you would drive, and so going the 2 miles would be quicker than going 1 mile if you walked,
Mhm.
even though 1 mile is shorter and seems easier on paper, and, um, I think putting trials and tribulations through like, with these characters, it helps them develop into better people
Sure.
and grow as individuals and change, like, the way they think. Like, one big thing that happened with Dell, the main character, is that, he's in high school, he doesn't know what he's gonna do after high school, and then his dad drops on him that, at the end of the year, he's being sent to military school for the rest of his senior year, and that's, like, a huge change that influences kind of, like, the projection of his life, and, kinda changes his outlook on things and how he interacts with the other characters and other characters that he meets, and at the end, he grows into, I think, a a redeemable character, and
Sure.
I definitely do think trauma and difficult times does help us grow. For me, particularly, getting sent back home from Boston during COVID to live with my parents, it helped me change my life for the better. I was
Mhm.
kind of in a dead end job. I was, in a place I didn't like, and putting me in a tough situation, it helped me kind of reshape everything. I went back to school. I continued writing this book, and it helped me grow as a person.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you had mentioned in the beginning, um, how this book deals a lot with racism and classism, and you had even at one point before we even recorded, you had mentioned that you asked for, like, my perspective, like, as a person
Mhm,
of color, right? And you wrote the book that and it deals heavily with themes like police brutality and racial profiling, and you had mentioned this in the beginning, like the classism here, like the divide between the rich and the poor boroughs. As a white author, did you feel, I guess, the weight of this? Did you feel any sort of hesitation when tackling those types of very specific lived experiences that maybe you may not have gone through yourself, but maybe like along the lines of what you were talking about before with the trauma and the PTSD and all that. Did you approach this the same way?
yes, I did.
Mhm,
Going back to my working with Monisha,
mhm,
she helped me kind of rewrite a lot of things because I'm a white guy, and I
sure.
I don't understand, and I don't think I'll ever understand a lot of things that, a lot of different minorities go through, or people of
Mhm,
different classes go through. And I didn't want this novel to be something that was detached from what's actually going on,
mhm,
and I wanted to get as many perspectives as I could on this book, especially from people of different backgrounds, and where Monisha came in, and she really, like, looked at
mhm.
some of the characters who I was writing. Like, one of the characters who's friends with Dell is an African American who deals with that police brutality and racism
Is this
firsthand.
Franklin you're talking about?
Franklin, yes.
Mhm,
And I wanted to make sure I was writing Franklin, correctly. I wanted to make
mhm,
sure, I wasn't being stereotypical. I wanted to make sure I was, making sure his character was coming from a place that
mhm.
other African Americans can understand and resonate with, and that's why, working with Monisha and working with, um, other people in my life from that background really helped
Yeah.
me put that character in perspective, as well as the other characters' perspectives and what they've had to deal with.
Right, and I don't wanna spoil too much, but, like, one of the interesting choices that you made as the author here is
Mhm,
you made the choice in this narrative to highlight, how sometimes the system rewards the wrong people,
mhm.
right? What message were you or are you trying to send about justice versus the reality of the legal system?
I think that there is a lot of corruption within America.
Mhm,
Even though this book takes place in 2014, and I wrote it, I started writing it in 2020, and I
mhm,
feel like there's been a lot more corruption and
mhm.
stuff within politics.
Yeah,
But there's always been that level of, um, you know, people working the system and putting people in charge who really shouldn't be in charge, and giving people a
mhm.
badge and a gun who shouldn't have a badge and a gun.
Sure.
And, like I said, Trinity City is a representation of America. And I wanted to make that where the mayor is just as corrupt as any, politician in Washington. Um,
Mhm.
and one of the characters who's a racist cop who, you know, is one of the main antagonists of the book. He ends up getting promoted to police commissioner through
Mhm.
a series of events, and that's because it benefits the mayor and his overall what he plans
Sure.
on doing. Not to spoil too much, but
Right.
it's all about political interests, and that's unfortunately how the real world works today.
Right. Like morality is very gray, right? Not only in real life, but here as well, like in the context of Trinity City, like because there's the laws themselves are corrupt and the heroes are very flawed. So I guess I mean that I have to ask, like, do you feel that there's any hope? Do you think that true justice at this point right now we're recording in 2025, but by the time this
Mhm.
airs it'll be February of 2026, right? Is Do you think there's hope as we begin this new year that true justice is even possible at all?
I'd like to think so. I think, we're in a very rocky time in America,
What makes you say
yeah,
that? What?
way crazy.
Everything's great, Steele. Everything is
Yeah.
great.
Just don't turn on the news, it's everything's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
great.
Just don't turn on the TV or turn on, use your phone or go outside, and you're fine.
Yeah, just if you put the blinders on, everything's fantastic.
Yeah,
But
everything's great. Yeah.
I do believe that, I'm a very hopeful person, and I think my book will, the people who read it will definitely open people's eyes. I think
Mhm,
the main message of my book is to take people in hand, your neighbors, regardless of, what they think, because there's higher powers against us, so to speak, that
mhm,
like are changing the system and corrupting justice. And
mhm,
I think the more people that wake up and see that there's no left and right, there's more of an up and down, that
mhm,
we can really band together as Americans, as people, and find that hope and,
mhm.
deliver justice. And
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
am hopeful.
Yeah. One of the things that I personally write about, and one thing that I've been studying a lot since I learned about it, and it's something that I have to manage, is the existential OCD, right? And so, for those anybody that's watching or listening that don't know what existential OCD, long story short, with existential OCD, people like myself, and Steele, I think this is something that you said that you deal with as well. We start to spiral because we start asking these questions that are unanswerable, right? Things like we start to worry about, like, like life and death. What's our purpose in life? Is there anything else out there, in the world? Like all this kind of stuff. These kind of questions that don't necessarily have an answer, and we just become so obsessive with it that it starts to kind of just snowball into really a really bad mind space to be in. And so, like, writing about existential OCD is something that you mentioned in your own journey, and we even see characters in the book grappling with their reality and these larger than life concepts. um did any of that, I guess, existential dread, did any of that, like, bleed into the sci-fi and supernatural elements of things? Because I find that sometimes I find comfort in things like sci-fi and supernatural
Mhm.
art, because it's providing at least some sort of answer for me, even if it's not necessarily true. Like for example, I love Star Wars, right? And like the when I now I can think to myself, okay, is there anything out there in the universe? And I'm like, Padme's out there, Luke is out there, and like well, whether it's real or not, like there is like some sort of comfort that I find in that kind of thing. And I'm curious, for you, as you were writing it, did any of that existential OCD, that existential dread, did any of that bleed into the sci-fi and supernatural elements of the story?
Yes, like when it comes to the supernatural aspect of the story, without spoiling too much,
Mhm,
there's definitely like a lot of death that's kind of circle around. Like there's deaths within the city. There's the main homicide that the main story revolves around, and you
mhm,
find out there's some supernatural aspect behind it, and it really revolves around um a person's life and death, and I think it makes the character like the people reading it kind of question like what if we could live forever, what
mhm,
if I had the ability to live another 100 years, or um and that kind of like circled around in my head when I was writing kind of like the supernatural part of it. And without spoiling too much, I definitely implemented a very humanistic part of that. Like, what if a person like you or me had the ability to live for as long as they wanted? And that kind of helped me write it. Like, what would my experiences be? Like, would I
mhm,
see history unfold?
right,
What would I grow? Would I learn? What type of people would I meet? And I think that kind of helps kind of put in perspective like the life that we have now and the people that we meet now and the history that we're seeing now. And,
mhm.
it kind of puts it into that perspective, so to speak.
Sure, sure. Another thing that we relate on, and you've mentioned this a couple times, is you have ADHD. I have ADHD, and we, as ADHDers, we know the struggle of the doom pile of unfinished projects that we start and just never finish. But you had mentioned, obviously, this took 5 years, right? What kept you coming back? Because that's sometimes a thing that a lot of ADHDers struggle with. Like, we'll start something, but coming back to it is very difficult. Like, either a lot of time it will go by, if we even and we'll go back, or we just won't go back at all. Is there something about this process of writing this book that kept you coming back for as much as you had to in order to get it done?
It was definitely a struggle.
Mhm,
There were months at a time where I just had straight writer's block and I did not
mhm,
know how to write at all. And there was like a point where I wrote pretty much the whole climax of the story. I wrote a whole like 4 chapters and I hated them. And I deleted
mhm,
all 4 of the chapters.
mhm. Yeah.
And it really discouraged me and I had to take a step back from it for like a couple of months. And it just was always in like the back of my head, how can I write this better? And one thing that kept pushing me was just kind of like the goal at the end. Like I always wanted to publish a book and the story where it was when I did hit those writer blocks was just like I thought it was really, really good, like, where it was
Mhm,
at, and I was like, "This needs to be finished." And, we kinda go back to the talk about life and death. I'm like, if I, unfortunately died tomorrow, I don't want a half-done book on my desktop, you
sure.
know? If I were to die tomorrow and someone were to find this book on my desktop, they could publish it tomorrow, and,
Mhm,
that was kind of like a driving point where, like, I want this book to be completed. I want it to be done
mhm,
right. And even though it took 5 years and a lot of, time and patience and research to write, it was always, a creative process for me and something I enjoyed doing. And so that kind of kept me attached to this project.
yeah. I've been grilling you about this book for about 41 minutes now. And there's something that I love, I do now, and this is for my subscribers. It's a very special thing that I do called reverse the mic,
Okay.
where I will turn the table over to you. I will turn the mic over to you, and you are allowed to ask me anything that you want, and I will answer it. It could be one question, two questions, whatever question or questions you have, I will answer it. And this is exclusive for my subscribers. So Steele, the mic is now yours, my friend. Ask
Fantastic.
away.
Well,
Yeah, yeah, I love it, man. I listen. I appreciate you. I appreciate your talent. I appreciate your insight. I really do think that people will enjoy this. So if by the time that this airs, if it's out, all you have to do, everybody that's watching or listening right now, in the show notes of this episode will be a link where you can get more information about it, where you can purchase it. All of that stuff will be in the description of this podcast. So all you have to do is click and get your copy, and then read through, and then let us know what you think of it. And Steele, I have one more question for you,
of course.
and this is the question that I always love to end my interviews with. What is one thing that you want the audience today to take away from our discussion?
Um, One thing that I want them to take away is that I want them to see themselves in my book, as like I mentioned before, and I want them to, take everything what I'm saying, and even though I'm like the face that you're seeing while reading this book, I want you to see yourself while reading it. I want you to see your own issues. I want you to see all of America's issues in it. I don't want you to picture my face while you read the book. I want you to picture your own experiences, and I want anyone who's reading this book to resonate with it on their own level. And I would say that's probably like the biggest takeaway that I want from this.
Absolutely, dude. Thank you, Steele, for hanging out with me today. I
I
appreciate it.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Did you have a good time today?
I actually had a great time. I appreciate you giving me a
Yeah.
platform to talk about, and I
Yeah, man.
appreciate you reading my book. And
Yeah, man.
I appreciate everything, and I appreciate you,
Yeah.
Monisha.
Yes, yes, we appreciate you. She's actually, I'm recording with her, uh, but by the time this airs, I think I'm recording with her in like mid-January, so she might be not long after you,
Oh, fantastic.
in an episode. So, yeah, thank you, Steele, again for hanging out with me, and wow. I'm still thinking about that 2 miles analogy that Steele said. The idea that sometimes the harder path is actually faster because it forces you to drive instead of walk. That is such a powerful way to reframe trauma and struggle. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Asking, how does this force me to level up? I really hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. If you want to support Steele, and I highly recommend that you do, the link to check out his brand new book, What the City Said, is available right down in the show notes. Go grab a copy and read it and let me know what you think. And again, a massive thank you to our presenting sponsor, Sucre. Seriously, if you're a part of the ADHD community, go treat yourself to a bottle of my fragrance. It is called Why Did I Walk Into This Room? You can buy that or any of the other amazing scents at sucrebay.com. And if you want to hear the exclusive Reverse the Mic segment where Steele asks me all of the hard questions, join me and the ADHD Vibers on Patreon and or Facebook. It's the best way to support this show and get closer to the community. Once again, thank you so much for watching and for listening. As always, my friends, much love, good vibes. I'll catch you next time. Bye.